Hey guys, it's Simon and welcome back to another video, and this time I want to talk about my Linux journey. I tried it out again like 2 months ago for almost 1 month as a daily driver on my computer, and as you can see I'm now back on Windows 11 again. I'm not 100% happy, but I want to talk a little bit about my issues with Linux that I had, to also give some, maybe not negative, but an honest opinion that I have about the operating system and the issues that I and also others face, but I come to that later on. And before I go into the details, I want to mention that I totally understand that for some people Linux is simply working and they are very happy with it. I personally also have it on my notebook where I do mainly some programming, browsing, and on holiday I book some hotels or flight tickets or something like that. Printing as well. Works perfectly fine on my notebook, super happy there, but on my computer, for whatever reasons, I cannot tell you that. Maybe some Linux nerds out there know it why, but for me personally, it simply did not work yet. And yeah, to give you a little bit of an introduction of my journey. So the first time when I started using Linux was about 5 or 6 years ago. I had 2 colleagues at work, my old company. They were really Linux fanboys. They always bashed on Windows because we had Windows on our notebooks at work and they hated it a lot. And yeah, one of them recommended me that I should then use Manjaro Linux, which was my first Linux distribution that I ever tried and installed on my computer back then. And as expected, to be honest, it was a total disaster. So first of all, I had black screens, so I couldn't even see anything after the installation, which was a known issue. So almost everything that when you have a problem with Linux, you just need to search in the internet and you will find forum posts with people that will help you, because there are a lot of problems, but for, I would say, most of the problems, there are solutions. And yeah, my problem was, just a very quick introduction to my Linux journey back then with Manjaro Linux, was that I had a black screen. Seems to be a problem with the NVIDIA drivers back then. I had to install something else. Then I had the screens working. I had problems with the audio setup because back then I had both companion speakers and also headphones and a microphone like I do today, and switching between the speakers and the headphones simply sometimes didn't work. Also like in Windows, where I simply press the button to now use the speakers or now use the headphones, that simply didn't work. I remember I had to create a script and run that script, and it didn't work all the time, so that was also quite buggy. Back then I also played a lot of League of Legends, which I don't do nowadays anymore, but back then I did. And that was also an issue because the client in League of Legends was super laggy. In-game, the performance was actually better than on Windows, but the client itself was very laggy. So at the beginning of the match, sometimes you need to exchange runes and spells and things like that. And sometimes I couldn't simply do that because it simply was too slow. So that client didn't work. And nowadays, just to give you a heads up there, League of Legends anyway won't work under Linux because it has an anti-cheat software. I forgot the name because I don't play it anymore, but there is an anti-cheat software for League of Legends and Valorant and so on, for the different Riot games. And that anti-cheat software is not supported under Linux or doesn't run under Linux. So all those games you anyway cannot play in Linux. So nowadays that's anyway not possible. Then printing also didn't work back then. And Manjaro Linux, I come to that in a moment, is based on Arch Linux, which means you get like on a daily basis, you get updates for everything. I don't know what, but you get updates for everything. And yeah, sometimes those updates simply broke my system. Like the taskbar was reset to whatever modifications I made, or it wasn't visible at all, and things like that. And the biggest downside for me was that my microphone, I have the Shure MV7, that one didn't work under Linux at all back then. Nowadays it works, there was no problem, but back then it simply didn't work because I think it was required to have the Motive application or whatever it was called back then. And that application wasn't running under Linux, and there were no drivers in the kernel of Linux for the Shure MV7, so the microphone simply wasn't working. And yeah, that was my first experience with Linux. I think I had it 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe a month, I cannot remember. And then I switched back to Windows. And yeah, then I was always still interested in Linux, and I tried out a lot of different distributions before I decided for one as a daily driver on my computer. And in Linux, let me show you that you can have a lot of different distributions, which might be an upside for some of you, but I found it quite overwhelming when you look into that, because there are like hundreds of these distributions. From what I understood, there is like 3 core Linux systems. I think it's Ubuntu, Fedora, and Debian. And then all these hundreds of other distributions, they're always based on one of those. Oh, and Arch Linux, of course, that's the 4th one maybe. They're always based on one of these core Linux systems, and then they modify something or personalize it a little bit, but the core remains the same. And yeah, you find there hundreds of different distributions like KDE, EndeavourOS, Beside, NixOS, whatever. There are really hundreds of those, and I personally simply find that overwhelming, because as an end user, I'm coming from a Windows background. I want one operating system. If there are some configurations or changes that I can do to personalize it, fine, but I don't want to look into the details of hundreds of distributions to find the one that should work for me. That one I find a little bit strange, to be honest. Also, since it's open source, and I can imagine there are not like hundreds of thousands of people contributing to Linux, like maybe it's happening for Microsoft with the paid developers. So having that many distributions, I could imagine, is also not that ideal, because then simply the knowledge and the optimizations and fixes and whatever, they are scattered maybe around between the different distributions and not centralized somewhere. So I could just imagine that. Also, maybe there's just 1 or 2 guys maintaining a specific distribution, and when they leave, you are simply screwed and need to switch, which is also not ideal. Anyway, what I tried out, I wanted to show that a little bit. I tried out so-called PopOS with the Cosmic desktop environment. And a desktop environment simply is, to put it very simple, is how your system will look like, how the windows look like, the taskbar behavior and things like that. And this is a screenshot of Cosmic, which is currently in beta from what I know. And it's based on Rust, so it's the most modern desktop environment, most likely. And a lot of people have faith in it, that will be the future of the Linux desktop environment. And yeah, I personally was very happy with that on my notebook, but there were some issues that I couldn't solve, and that's why I went for a different desktop environment. Just to mention one annoying thing, maybe it's fixed nowadays, but the numpad of my notebook didn't work. So whenever I did a reboot, I had to press the numlock button to make the numpad work again, and it did not remember that between reboots. I don't know why, it just was like that. But yeah, it looks something like that. Then I also tried out KDE Plasma, which I think that one is most likely the one that people like the most under Linux. You have a billion of customization options. You can have a taskbar everywhere at the bottom, top, right, left. You can modify what kind of applications you want to show there, what kind of apps. There is really the animations, how the window pops up and goes down. You can have a macOS-like behavior. You can have it like Windows. There's really billions of configurations and customizations that you can do in KDE Plasma, which again is most likely great for some people. I personally was a little bit overwhelmed and most likely just kept the default settings. But the problem that I had with KDE Plasma is that from time to time, simply it screwed up, or it forgot about my taskbars that I had, and then just went back to the default one. So I had to restore that and then configure everything again and again. So for me, it was not 100% stable. And that's why also in the end, I didn't go for that one here. Then I tried out Fedora Workstation, which is right now the Linux distribution that I use on my notebook. It has the Gnome desktop, or Gnome. I don't know, they pronounce it very weirdly. For me, it's Gnome, but I think they call it Gnome or Gnome, something like that. Anyway, that desktop environment looks like this, and it's a very opinionated environment or desktop environment. And I show you a video later on how it looks on my notebook and guide you a little bit through, because personally I liked it a lot. And yeah, we mentioned the positive parts and the things that I loved with Gnome, because that's also the one that I used on as a daily driver. I didn't use Fedora Workstation. I didn't know about that back then. I used a different one, but I come to that in a moment. But the desktop environment was Gnome. And then there is also Hyprland. There I have a screenshot for that, which is actually a completely different approach. So how windows are handled. So normally in Windows, when we open up different windows like that, they are simply overlapping. So you have different windows. You can move them to the left, top, bottom, whatever. Nowadays, we also have this snapping functionality that you go to a specific corner and things like that. But Hyprland is one of the so-called tiling window managers. So instead of floating or overlapping the different windows that are popping up, it's automatically moving then into a specific tile grid. So the first window that you open will simply be, for example, a full screen of a browser. Then if you open the console, then the browser simply goes to the left half and the console would be on the right half. And if you open then another terminal in that case, then it will split the right half again and put one console to the top and one to the bottom. And basically nothing is ever overlapping. It's always next to each other. And I wanted to try that out because I thought maybe for programming it's quite convenient and I like it. And by the visual effects and how it behaves is really, really cool. So there are shortcuts that you can then jump around between the different windows here. You don't need the mouse that much. But for me personally, at least on my notebook, it didn't work out because I just have a full HD resolution. And for example, if the browser is on the left side and the IDE on the right side, I don't see enough content. So I always had to make the different windows then full screen. So like jumping to the right half, then make that application full screen, then close it again, go to the left side of the browser, make that full screen again. And in the end, it was simply quite annoying. So I was faster and more productive with just overlapping windows and with alt-tapping through it instead of using this tiling window manager. But yeah, I saw that some people use that, and I see definitely the potential for certain work things where you could gain a lot of productivity boosts when using a tiling window manager. In the end, the distribution that I used is called EndeavourOS, which is based on Arch Linux. And from what I know, this is simply the cutting edge drivers and technology in the Linux environment. And I decided for that because I thought some of the games are new. Like I played Titan Quest 2, which came out just recently. I have an NVIDIA 4070 card. I have two screens with WQHD resolution, so the 2560 by 1440 or something. And I thought, so I most likely need Arch Linux to have the most up-to-date driver so that my entire hardware is working. And I think that is not necessary and is maybe one of the reasons why it wasn't that stable for me in the end, and why I went back to Windows. And I will definitely try out a different distribution, maybe in a year or two, not right now, but I will try it out again in the future. Anyway, EndeavourOS is Arch Linux based and has a very simple installer, because from what I read, installing Arch Linux is very time consuming and complicated. And with EndeavourOS, you simply have a you put it on a USB stick with like Ventoy, for example, is a tool that you can install on your USB stick. Then you simply put different ISO files of the different Linux distributions on your USB stick, and then you can launch them with the, is it called live demo or something of the Linux system, which personally I find very cool. So you can always try out any Linux distribution without installing it. So you just plug in the USB stick. In the BIOS boot up menu, you select that your USB stick should be used for loading it. And with Ventoy, you then simply choose whatever ISO file you have downloaded, and then you see the operating system. And yeah, I went there with EndeavourOS. And here I want to show you now a video of my current notebook. So where I have the Fedora workstation installed, but from a user point perspective, it's actually the same, or I configured it almost the same as EndeavourOS, because as mentioned, it uses I use the Gnome desktop environment, so it doesn't really matter if it's Fedora, Ubuntu, EndeavourOS, whatever. So first of all, what I like a lot about Gnome is that it's a very clean desktop environment, in my opinion. So you see the top bar, which is not an entire taskbar over the entire screen. It simply has a couple of these islands where in the top middle you see, for example, the calendar. Top right you have then sound, Wi-Fi and so on. And top left would then open the applications, if I remember correctly. I almost never use this button, but it's there. And then you have at the bottom, you have like a taskbar with the most important application. And on the bottom right, where you have these multiple dots in a grid, there you can then open up the entire applications and scroll a little bit through it. And it also has a, how's it called, workspace set up. So right now you see the first workspace, and to the right you see that there would be a second workspace. But personally, I'm also not a workspace user. I just use one workspace and that's it. So I'm not yet the guy who uses different workspaces. But in the end, for me personally, it's a very modern and a very pleasant look and feel of the desktop environment in general. So here you see I clicked now on the show apps, that you have the different applications there available, and now I went to the primary workspace. And here's already one of the features that I really, really loved, and I miss it under Windows. It's a console that simply pops up from the top. When I press the F12 button, you can move it to whatever hotkey, but for me it was F12, and this console is always on top of any other window. And that was really great, because sometimes you read something in the browser, you need to enter a specific command or install something or run a specific terminal command when you, for example, for me, when I'm programming something, and then having this console which simply pops up from the top, and when I press F12 again, it hides again. That one is really, really great, and I loved it. Unfortunately, I couldn't find anything like that in Windows, which works as easy as this extension on the Gnome. I think it's called the D-term, if I remember correctly. Under KDE Plasma, it's Yakuake or whatever. But I found that console, so this coming down from the top console, Quake-like console, I think it's called, under every Linux distribution so far, and it's really, really great. Then what I also love about Linux, and I actually used it now under Windows, is the package managers. So normally Windows user, you use when you want to install a software, you look it up in the browser, then you download the exe file and install it. And yeah, this could be a little bit time consuming. Also, you always need to be sure that you don't go to any malware site or so, and that you go to an official page where you download then the things. And yeah, it's not that efficient. And in Linux, you can, of course, do something similar. So there is like a Microsoft, it's not a Microsoft store, but something like a software store that you can open there and browse for the different applications and install it. Or you can simply use one of the package managers. And again, there are billions of these package managers, because for whatever reason, every distribution decided to have their own package managers. You have under Arch Linux, you have the Pacman package manager, and also Yay, I think it's called, so YAY. Then on Fedora Workstation, as you see it here, there you have the DNF package manager. I think Ubuntu has apt. Maybe there are even more. And yeah, for me, again, weird. Why not just have one package manager and make that one the best ever out there instead of having a different package manager for every system? But whatever. In the end, like in this example, I just simply searched for Steam. Then it simply checks the different repositories, which are then somehow configured in the background. It gives you then the different options which are available there. And then you can install something with like here it would be DNF install. In Arch Linux, it was pacman -s, if I remember correctly. In the end, it's when you get used to that, it's a very convenient and fast way to install different applications and browse for the different things, which is really great. And I also use that now under Windows. So they are now use winget, which is the Windows package manager. In my opinion, it's not as good as the Linux package managers that I have used so far, but it's something. And for most of the things, it's good enough. Then another thing that I really loved under Linux for me personally for my workflow is that sometimes when I develop games, I need to rename files. Like in this example, it's already correctly renamed. So we have a walk down animation of an enemy in a game. And normally I just have the files then called like walk 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or whatever. Maybe with brackets, I think, if I do it with a specific program. And then I need to bring them into a specific format. And the index at the end with 0001 is actually very important for me. And under Windows, I always have to rename file by file or use power toys with some regular expression stuff, which is, not that intuitive, and I always forget how to use it. Under Linux, in that case, again, under Gnome, there you have that specific file rename functionality. And as you see here, so I can just enter walk south. And then I added here that I want to have some numbers at the end of the file name. And then it automatically renames them now to walk south 01, 02, 03, and so on, which is very, very convenient for me, and I need this functionality a lot during the game development. So that is also one part that I loved under Linux. So in general, that's it. Personally, as mentioned, I like the desktop environment a lot. One thing that I did not mention yet, but you can see that here on the window at the top right of IntelliJ. There is by default, there is no hide or minimize and maximize button in Gnome. You can have hotkeys for that. For me, it's the Windows key and H to hide it, or like normal in Windows with the Windows key and then left, top, bottom, and right arrow keys to move the window around to make it big, small, move it to the left, to the right, and so on. You can enable these buttons again if you want to click them with the mouse button. There are so-called Gnome tweaks, which you can use. But personally, I found out that I never clicked those buttons, and that they are not there was not a problem for me. It's actually a little bit nicer because then you don't have that many buttons at the top right and have a more minimalistic layout, which personally I prefer a lot. So here you see it, it's the Gnome tweaks, and there you can change certain behavior of the desktop environment. Okay, so I now showed you how my environment looked a little bit like. It was my notebook, it was not my computer, but I had a very similar setup on my computer when I tried it out for a month. And I mentioned like I like the terminal, I like the layout. It used way less RAM. So when I have Windows running, let me check, I think it's already, I don't know. I have, of course, some applications now running, but from what I know, I think it already uses like 3 or 4 gigabyte when Windows 11 is simply running empty. So right now I have 9 gigabyte usage from what I see here. I think it's 3 or 4 gigabyte too when I run Windows 11. And Linux used, I think it was 800 megabytes, 600 megabyte. It was definitely less than 1 gigabyte. So it's also very good. It was way more responsive. So opening up applications, moving them around simply felt snappier and more performant than the Windows counterpart nowadays. And yeah, so I mentioned now, so everything was so great and I liked it a lot. So why did I go back to Windows? And I think this is the most important part for users out there. And before I go into the details of that, just to mention my setup again, because again, I am pretty sure that it's related to what kind of setup you are using. Because again, when I have it on my notebook, it's just one screen, the built-in notebook keyboard and so on. Everything works perfectly. I never had freezes, crashes, whatever. I'm simply happy with it. But on my computer, there I have 2 screens with the WQHD resolution as mentioned before. I have an NVIDIA 4070 graphics card. What else? Maybe that is, I think, the most important factors for that. I have an AMD CPU, and yeah, a couple of things didn't work at all. So the second screen in general on a Linux doesn't seem to be not well supported. So getting a taskbar on the second screen or a wallpaper on the second screen is not like in Windows where it simply worked. Under Linux, you need to have either a special extension, you need to run some console commands to guide to a specific wallpaper for the second screen. So for whatever reason, they are not there with the dual screen setup. And that one surprised me a lot. But yeah, you can find a lot of forum posts about these issues. It's not a big problem, but at least if you want to have like a specific wallpaper or stretch the wallpaper over both screens, it's not as straightforward as in Windows. And I found it a little bit weird because we are in the year 2025. I think a lot of developers use a second or even a third screen. So I was wondering why that is not natively or easy supported. But again, that was just a minor issue. Then, for whatever reason, I had so many freezes. There are people out there which say, oh, Windows is always freezing and requires reboots and so on. Linux doesn't have this issue. Let me tell you, the amount of freezes that I had in that 1 month of using Linux, I didn't have that many freezes with Windows in the last like 10 years or something like that. And I cannot even tell you what was the problem. It was simply when I was alt-tapping through different applications. Sometimes the alt-tab animation, so like this one here where you would see different windows here, that one simply froze and then I couldn't type or click anywhere and I had to make a hard reset. So press the power button on my computer for a couple of seconds and then reboot it. From what I saw, it could be a problem with the Wayland protocol, which from my understanding is a more modern protocol of how Windows and applications under Linux behave or something like that. And that one is still quite new. So you can change back to the old protocol, which was X11 or something like that. But even that, so I tried that out as well. It did not solve the issue on my end. And with Wayland, there at least you can find a couple of people who have the same issue. And there, for me, it simply froze too many times to the point that when I was pressing alt-tapping, I was like, oh, please don't freeze. Because when you are in the middle of something, like programming something or cutting a video, requiring a hard reset, then is really, really super annoying. That was one of the main reasons why I went back to Windows, because I want the machine to simply work and I don't want to waste hours to identify for me a problem which is for a very, very basic functionality. So if I cannot simply alt-tab through the different applications, then the operating system is simply not for me. That is really a basic feature and that must work. Otherwise, it's not for me. Then I had a very similar issue with games. Also here, to give you a heads up, the games that I was playing and trying out are some Blizzard games. So I played Diablo 2, I played Heroes of the Storm, I played Warcraft 3, I tried War 3 Champions, I played Counter-Strike 2, Titan Quest 2, and one more, I cannot remember. And in the end, what the problem was for me, normally I play my games with windowed full screen so that I can move my mouse to the second screen where I usually have the browser open with some music or video, and then I just click to the next music or to a different video and go back then to my game. And here I had the issue that sometimes the windowed full screen was then minimizing because especially with the Blizzard games, they don't work natively in Linux. There you need the special, is it called Wine or something? You have an emulator that you can run some Windows-like application like the Battle.net launcher. And then in this virtual environment or whatever that is, you then need to run the Blizzard games. And yeah, there sometimes when I was clicking away or minimizing the game, then it couldn't maximize back anymore. I just saw a very tiny little black window and I couldn't get it back to a full screen. And that was super annoying when I played competitive games like Heroes of the Storm or Counter-Strike, because when you need to restart the game, you are obviously out of the game. And it's not as quick as in Windows that I just double-click the application, then I'm back in the game within a couple of seconds. No, as mentioned before, in Linux, what I need to do, I need to close this entire Wine setup thingy. Then I need to start it up again, which takes a couple of seconds, quite a long time actually, before the Battle.net client with the login mechanism and everything. And it's more like 3 to 4 minutes until I'm back, for example, in Heroes of the Storm. And this is simply, what was very annoying, and also one of the main reasons why I went back to Windows. Then War 3 Champions, it's a special client for Warcraft 3 where you can, where you have a better ladder support for competitive gaming. They also support their ladder for fun games. And War 3 Champions simply didn't work at all for me. So it was so buggy. And again, it's not just me. Let me find that page. It's this one. I remember that there was a GitHub page, and there I don't go through the details because maybe most of you are not playing War 3 Champions or Warcraft 3, but you can see here it's a guide of many, many different pages where someone describes what console commands you need to run, what kind of, Proton version, what configuration in the consoles you need to do. And after all of that, there are still some issues that could happen. So you need to prepare some scripts and whatever. And even doing all of that, for me, War 3 Champions simply didn't work. Sometimes I could get into a game, but most of the time it simply didn't work. Was not a big issue because I just played Direct Strike there from time to time. And I simply decided to not play that game then anymore because it didn't work. So that was also just one of the reasons. And to summarize the gaming topic in general, if you play a game which has anti-cheat, like the Riot games, I think Fortnite has that as well. All these games, they won't work. You cannot play them under Linux. It is what it is. There are the fanboys out there which say, but it's the developer's fault that they don't support Linux with their anti-cheat software. Doesn't matter. You cannot play these games. That is the important part. And again, as I mentioned before, some games won't work initially. So normally very new games that come out, they might not work on the first day under Linux. You need to wait until someone makes a patch or updates the so-called Proton version, which from what I understand is like the middleware to somehow make the Linux, Vulkan, OpenGL part, whatever, work with DirectX games or something like that. And yeah, there you simply sometimes have bad luck and your game won't work. It's simple as that. So for that purpose, if you are a gamer like me, then I would try out your games first and verify if they are even working under Linux. And if they don't, then yeah, you're anyway screwed. You can either decide to not play these games anymore, or if you're like me and you still want to play those games, then you have to go back to Windows. That's it. Okay, and just to mention a few other minor problems that I had, but it was the things that I mentioned so far, though there were a couple of big topics in it, which for me personally ended up removing Linux for me and going back to Windows 11. But just to mention a few more, there was some problem from time to time that my microphone was like crackling when recording or going into Discord. Simply rebooting the computer worked then again. Then sometimes the browser, I used the Brave browser, that one from time to time didn't load when I clicked on the icon. I had to start it then via the terminal. Then after the next reboot, it worked again. But from time to time after a reboot, it simply didn't load with a mouse click. I had to run it via the terminal. Also, gaming related, but the mouse restriction inside games so that I cannot move outside of the gaming window. That one also sometimes randomly didn't work, that I could simply move then my mouse outside the window, which again sometimes led to the error that it minimized the window and I couldn't maximize it anymore, which was very annoying. And one topic that I thought would be a problem, but actually wasn't a problem, was the fan configuration. So I hate noise and I have very silent computer components, and my fans, when they are running, usually you almost don't hear them, especially when you have headphones on your ears. You don't hear my computer at all. And under Windows, there I have this application, which I'm not happy that I need to have that, but yeah, it is what it is. It's called Armory Crate, and there you have Fan Expert, and there I can set the profile, like silent fan profile, that the fans are not running that fast until a certain temperature is reached. And yeah, I thought that this might be a problem under Linux because there is no fan expert. So another topic, some of your software that you are using simply might not work under Linux. So if you are like an Adobe user and you use Adobe Premiere or After Effects or whatever, they don't work under Linux. It's also one problem, or a bigger problem for some people out there. Anyway, the fan configuration. So since it's software based for me, I looked into certain solutions under Linux, and the one that I found, I forgot the name, I wasn't able to use it because it was very, not user-friendly, I would say, and complicated to use. But in the end, I found out that my motherboard actually has also a BIOS configuration. So I can simply go into UEFI when I boot up my computer, and there can also make some auto-run or automatic configuration of the fans, and then also switch to a specific profile to make them more silent. So in the end, I didn't need the software solution at all because I had then the hardware solution via the BIOS, which worked great. But a second topic which is related to that is firmware updates. So for example, I have don't know if you can see it, the Razer mouse, I have a Logitech wireless keyboard, I have a Sennheiser headphones, I have a Shure MV7, and from time to time there is new firmware coming out for those devices, and I like to update those. And some of the applications or software to update then the firmware simply is not available under Linux, so you cannot upgrade the firmware of your devices. For me, it again was not a big problem because I updated them just recently under Windows, so I did not need to do that. But if I wanted to do that in the future under Linux, I at least didn't find out or know how to do that, because from what I understood, if the software, for example, Razer, whatever, Synapse or whatever it's called, isn't supported under Linux, then you simply cannot update the firmware anymore of your Razer products, which is also not great. I'm pretty sure there are some open source alternatives and solutions again, but it's time consuming to find that out. We are already reaching 40 minutes, which is way too long than I had initially expected. So I just want to mention two more things to make it short and not go crazily overboard. First of all, I want to recommend a channel which is called Bog. I found that out during my Linux journey because the YouTube algorithm then started to recommend me a lot of Linux videos. And you see it here in German. I don't know, because YouTube thinks it needs to translate everything into German nowadays, which I hate. I don't know how to turn that off. But his videos are in English. And when you watch them, he has a very, very similar experience than I with Linux. So you can check out the Linux first experience, then Linux after 1 year, and then maybe another one where he's trying out Arch Linux or something, and watch them. I find him pretty funny. He has a great humor, and he also goes into almost every pitfall that you can fall into when you try to install and run Linux. And I personally had a very, very similar experience than him. He's just making way more professional videos than me. So give it a look. I found it. I can recommend that. They are very funny to look at, and you get some of the experience that people out there have with Linux. And the last thing, then I really stop it here. The last thing is that I totally understand that Linux is free. So of course there are some issues and not everything is working, which is totally fine. But since it's free, it's also not really free, in my opinion, because as I described now for the last 30 to 40 minutes, there are a lot of tiny little issues, sometimes bigger ones, that you then need to look up. You are almost never alone. So all the problems that I had were not only my problems. There are a lot of people out there which had those problems, and you will find a solution for most of your issues, but it's very time consuming because under Windows, everything simply works. At least for me, things simply work. It's not very complicated. But Linux, it's not so easy. So you always need to look up something, make a fix, maybe run a terminal command where you have no idea what you're actually doing, but it fixes your issue, so you are happy with it. And yeah, so it's also to make it then look and behave in the way you want, that can be very, very time consuming. And then in my opinion, it's not really free because the time is precious. And for me personally, I am now too old. I simply want my computer to work and run. I don't want to fiddle around in config files or whatever to make very basic things work. It should just work. That's it. Okay, and with that, I leave it at that. The video is way too long. Sorry for that. Thanks for the people who stayed until the end. Let me know what kind of experience you had with Linux. Let me also know if you want some more details about a certain topic. I can answer that in the comments below. And other than that, wish you a great day and rest of the week. Bye-bye.